What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Political Spectrum podcast. As many of you already know, we're a podcast that collects people with different political beliefs on the political spectrum, gathers them together to talk about recent news, politics, etc. Today, we're finishing off our interview edition with our own members. Today, I'm interviewing the liberal of our podcast, Danny. Danny, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Danny, and apparently I'm still allowed on this podcast.
Well, I mean, you are working hard at your job, so you know it's difficult for you to get on, but when you can, it certainly is a pleasure. So let's just jump right into it. I interviewed the other two. Obviously, they're both very different. In fact, they're formulating a debate between each other right now, video, and I'm like, okay, whatever. That's irrelevant. That's irrelevant to this. But I just want to ask you just a plain, simple question. How do you describe liberalism in your eyes, your perspective, or whatever you describe yourself as? How do you describe yourself when you explain it to other people, like politically?
I don't know if I ever really described myself to other people.
Now's a good opportunity.
First, I guess I'll describe how I would kind of define liberalism or progressivism or whatever of the isms you want to call it on the left. Generally, I would sum it up as the belief that the government can be used as a tool for good, that it is a necessary tool for good. I very much believe in Thomas Hobbes and his theory, his, I don't know what you'd call it, belief system.
Yeah.
That
it works.
That basically you need this Leviathan, as he would refer to it, of power to kind of hold society together.
Mm-hmm. That's a very...
that without it, we are generally not kind people if left in the wilderness, that we do what we need to survive, and that's a fine instinct without a society, but within a society we sometimes need to shed the more selfish desires.
See, I think that's a very interesting perspective that you're bringing up Hobbes, because I know Hobbes has a very pessimistic view of humanity. Do you follow that pessimism to humans as well, or is it just the political aspect of Hobbes that you think is the most relevant, and why you consider government to be a good tool to be used to progress society?
I actually think Hobbes is right to be pessimistic about human society in a vacuum, that without fundamental building blocks, people would need to kill to survive. That if you cannot believe you are going to wake up in the morning, you do what you need to do. But on the flip side of that, I believe that the government exists to free us from that, and that I take the optimistic perspective that human beings came together to form societies to better themselves from that. So I think he's right about human nature in a vacuum. I don't know if I share his pessimism about humanity since we've uplifted ourselves from it.
Right. So, and to make things a little simple, just the main solution to this, to fix things that are in this vacuum situation, is to form a society and to form a collection of rules, laws, whatever you want to call it. Maybe in the olden times it was called that, but today we call it a government, obviously. So let's dive into this theory of government and the power that government can have. Now, I want to first dive into this particular American system that we have. Obviously, we have a very specific set of rules. As a liberal, do you think that these specific set of rules, maybe I'd say like the three branches of government, the state and federal thing, and this is going to be a broad question, so you might take a while answering this, but do you think this is the best system for your particular thought process on the way government should be?
I'm going to have to defer to Winston Churchill on this one and say it is the best form of government, or rather, it is the worst form of government except for every other form of government. It's the best we've got. Like, I don't believe there is a perfect government. I don't believe you're going to have Socrates, philosopher king. It's one of the reasons, without getting too much into the policy of it, that I find myself frustrated with Obama, because he's created this system that's now going to be handed over to someone that I don't politically agree with, and he's created too many
Like
avenues for which the executive
loopholes.
to that's a I don't know if I call them loopholes, because they aren't technically loopholes, but
Just
he's
to
created
simplify it.
the surveillance state, this the nature of drone warfare. There's a lot of stuff I'm not thrilled with, because it while Obama was in office, a lot of left wingers in the country looked away.
Right.
To me, semi included. I don't know if it depends issue to issue without getting into it, but
So I think what you're getting into here is actually an interesting shift that I think a lot of people come to the conclusion of after an election comes and the opposite party is now in power. They expanded, uh, the President Obama expanded powers in some aspects, and now the other party's in power and they're worried. So what avenue do you think is the best way to take to maybe limit that power, in the sense of, well, we don't want this power to be in the wrong hands?
I think we need to reform our election system so that we can better elect congressional representatives. I think Congress and the Senate have been woefully led astray by moneyed interests.
Do you believe in term limits?
Uh, I go back and forth on term limits. There's a issue with term limits that people don't realize, that younger senators and congressmen would then be relying even more heavily on like lobbyists who have been around the block and who are then more informed, as opposed to older senators. So there's a trade-off there that I'm not sure where I fall. Maybe like certain term limits, but like fairly generous. Like maybe
Mm-hmm.
not Joe Biden's long record in the Senate, but maybe not like the 2 terms in the Senate some people suggest. I'd probably fall closer to like 3 or 4 if we were just ballparking. But I don't know if again, term limits I'm less interested in, so much as I'm interested in reforming things like Citizens United
Right.
and
And
just bribery in general.
so let's get to Citizens United, because this is actually, that's actually a topic I studied a little bit even before getting into college. I was a liberal back then, so I think I can imagine your position on the whole McCain-Feingold Act back when it happens. But explain that a little bit to the viewers that don't know what that Supreme Court decision basically did, and what the McCain-Feingold Act did do before that decision.
I'm actually not well enough versed on what the McCain-Feingold Act specifically did. I'm just familiar with the end results of Citizens United.
Okay, well, go ahead
Um,
and describe that.
the end results of Citizens United was, well, for starters, Citizens United is a conservative group who sought the lawsuit for towards the Supreme Court, not towards the Supreme Court, brought it to the Supreme Court on behalf of wanting to spend as much money as they conceivably could to lobby against, at the time, Hillary Clinton, which may sound weird since that's like 2010. um,
It never
yeah,
stops.
some things don't change, huh? Yeah, exactly. Um, anyway, they won by a split decision, 5-4, and the end result are things that you may have seen in the last 2 elections, super PACs, which are political action committees, which take unlimited money, don't have to disclose where it's from or how it's spent to the FCC, which regulates. Is it wait FEC? FEC, FEC. So many goddamn acronyms in
I
government.
know, I know.
The Federal Elections Committee.
Right.
They don't have to disclose any of the money, and they get to spend it however they want on behalf of the candidates.
So I think that's an interesting thing to obviously rally against, because I don't want to be like, I don't want to bring this up. I don't want to go too much into the election, but I know you did support Hillary Clinton, who did have more money from super PACs than, say, Donald Trump did. So you would want to limit that money to any candidate, correct? So it's good to have that position.
Yeah, no, I think that was a big complaint among the Bernie further left about Hillary Clinton and taking the money and having the super PACs. And I get the argument. The argument in Clinton's favor was, going into the election, you never would have assumed Donald Trump would have been the candidate. So you built up your armaments expecting to fight a war on equal footing.
Right.
You don't disarm yourself while the enemy still has the arms.
Right.
So I'm not necessarily sure if I want the Democrats to just unilaterally say, we will never take money from anyone above a certain threshold until everything is hunky-dory, while the Republicans still just guzzle it up. Because then it's like, okay, now we're fighting a war of attrition. Great.
Right.
But yeah, no, I definitely would prefer not having it at all.
So let's edge away from that. You mentioned Bernie Sanders, which I think, there were a lot of people on the left that did like him, but I know you were not a big fan of him. So I want to know, to the people that don't know the differences between certain types of liberals, where does Bernie Sanders get it wrong that maybe other Democrats that you like get it right? And maybe name some of those Democrats. Obviously, you're one of those Democrats.
I would say in the policy detail. I think Bernie Sanders absolutely is right on his ambitions. I think public options for healthcare, universal education are wonderful things to push forward towards. But the policy details of how he sought to do it, I found lacking, or rather, I disagreed with.
Is it more about maybe you want to do more gradual change, while he's talking more like drastic? That's maybe not possible.
It's more of an approach issue. Public option for healthcare, I think, is something doable. I think there's actually tremendous support for it in the country. I think most of the polls show it as a slim to solid-ish majority, depending on how you phrase the question, which I know you get into polling issues, but my point is, I think it's a solid thing to push for if you have the political force behind it. My issue more kept coming back to education. I have this issue where I feel his focus was on college. And my issue with focusing on college is that's focusing on renovating the third floor of a house where the foundation is cracking. I think we need to really fundamentally double down on our high school. We really need to add universal pre-K to the public tiered system, because I think I forget exactly the studies and what they exactly showed, but the long-term benefit to a person going through pre-K is exponential for their education, which is in turn exponentially greater output into the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't like bringing things back to the economy at all times. I think the economy is not how you judge the well-being of a society, but that being one of the benefits of focusing more on the lower level of education before you focus so much on college. That said, the debt reduction plans, big thumbs up on every side of the left wing. Just because the federal government making money off student loans is ridiculous.
I agree in some ways, although I just wouldn't want the federal government to be doing it. All right, so I want to edge towards another topic right now, and I want to edge towards the media. So I know that when you did, or and media and culture, because I know when you did your thesis paper back in college, you focused heavily on it was the media, correct? And I know you worked as
Yes.
on a newspaper in DC. So talk a little bit about what you learned about the American media's history, maybe how that shapes how you, maybe how that shapes the current debacle that's going on right now with this fake news and both sides blaming each other for X, Y, and Z when clearly they're both in the wrong, at least in some ways, at least in my opinion. Maybe you differ with that opinion, but go ahead.
Uh, that's a tough one. There's a lot of heads to that beast.
Entering a new generation, maybe for the media.
That's probably the biggest part of it. I think um, media, in a sense, is always propaganda. All forms of media, like posters, music, everything. Uh, I'm gonna paraphrase a segment of my thesis, I guess. Um, Media is essentially putting out ideas. You are putting your views out into the world in some manner, and it's the clash of your ideals as an artist and the ideals of a viewer and recipient that in turn are politics. All media in some sense is politics. One of the issues that takes on in a modern context is the floodgates have been opened for every jackass and dipshit to put out whatever they want, and people latch on. And I think because for so long we had, in a sense, journalism as gatekeepers, in a sense, that they could parse through the all the bullshit and give you the diamonds. They give you perhaps skewed but generally informative take on things.
And in a lot of ways, I feel like even with the mainstream media, and I agree with you, the floodgates are open. There's obviously very bad information out there from a lot of these alternative sites. But the mainstream media, I noticed that with the advent of the internet, a lot of it's about getting the information to the viewer as quick as possible. So a lot of this investigative journalism is almost on a decline, like just as a universal. And would you agree with that? And if you do, what's the solution?
Uh, well, I'll quote a lecture I sat through in DC on journalism, and that there are now only two revenues in which to actually be profitable in news and reporting these days, and that is to either be first or to be best. The problem is so many are focused on first. I would argue the Washington Post has overall done a very good job at long-term informative stuff. I think David Fahrenthold is the first person who comes to mind because the guy literally went through like every supposed donation from the Donald Trump Foundation and like outlined and called everyone, and like that kind of work, like whatever your opinion of the results of the reporting, he did the goddamn work. And the recommendation I always see, and I tend to agree with because it kind of comes back to the moneyed interest. I think actually subscribing to papers helps. I think when you leave these news organizations to be reliant on views and thus advertising, then they're going to focus on what gets eyeballs.
So things like the Wall Street Journal, for instance, a paid subscription to like a magazine, you think that's like the probably the best avenue to get the most efficient news out?
I think it helps. I don't know if it's a solid cure. I think there's always going to be that desire to lean towards views and eyeballs. I think cable is never going to figure out a way, at least in the current environment, to be profitable and informative. I think having to fill 24 hours is just a detriment,
Do you
hands
think
down.
do you think part of the problem is just, and I don't know, I'm asking you your opinion. Part of the problem could be maybe people just in general, just their desire to see things so quickly. Do you think maybe the foundation of society's view on media in general needs to change? Or do you think just, I don't know, what do you think?
Uh, I don't know, because there's kind of a two-sided problem there. The problem is people are too quick to trust what they see without verifying, and on the other hand, people never trust the media. No, I'm
It's,
serious. Like,
I know.
people have a low opinion of the media, equivalent with Congress and big corporations. And I understand it. I really do. The media has failed in a lot of key ways, especially in the last few years. But that fundamental lack of trust is corrosive. I I get being skeptical. Believe me, I'm very quick to be skeptical of stuff on cable, no matter what network, because even as a liberal, I know like conservatives love to have a monopoly on bitching about bias in the media, but like CNN hired Corey Lewandowski, Donald Trump's former campaign manager, who was still on retainer. Like, does no one realize how fucking immoral and like corrupt that is in general?
It certainly is.
But
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 it's
what I just
people's
wanted to
perspectives.
which is fine as much as I hate him, that's fine when they hire Jeffrey Lord, who's just a Trump fanatic, whatever. But Gordon Lewandowski was getting checks the entire time he was working there from Donald Trump.
Oh, yay. Gotta love that.
That's corruption, and that I agree is is something to be scorned. But I, I just when your gut reaction is cynicism and skepticism, I or not and instead of skepticism,
Hmm.
I just find that's corrosive to the American system. That this natural incline some people, especially on the right, have towards democratic institutions, especially in the government. This that it's not skepticism, it's distrust. I find that just corrosive.
Do you think people themselves just have to be more vigilant and maybe on the news that they see, maybe be, well, more open minded and more vigilant at the same time? Listen, like watch the news and say, okay, let me fact check this. Was that what people have to do?
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
that possible though? Because not a lot of people have the time nowadays.
yeah, it's difficult. Um, but I mean, I guess it just comes down to a certain level of due diligence. Not every person is going to get to fact check every story they're curious about, but if there are stories that sensationalize you, if they enrage you, if they get you worked up, or they get you passionate in favor of something, maybe take a second and look at least that. Maybe not every minor thing you see, but if you find yourself, this person did this, they did that, they said this, maybe look up the context. Like one thing we had was brother Jeff at our college. He spread a story about Hillary Clinton that I ended up fact checking, and it was false.
He might watch this.
I I gladly, I would love to point it out to him because I don't think he means to spread a false story. I don't think he likes spreading false stories even accidentally. But because he didn't take the time to fact check that story, that one gets out there.
Well, go ahead and explain that story.
Oh well, okay. That one was. I didn't really think the specific story was important, but he spread a story that Hillary Clinton was fired from the Watergate committee for lying and corruption and all some being evil or whatever. I don't know, whatever the specific conspiracy was. The problem is she wasn't. Some guy who worked with her said mean things about her in a book 30 years after the fact. And then in the height of the 2008 campaign, someone twisted the quote and then ran with it because he said she should have been fired for a thing that she did, except the thing was filing. I believe it was she filed a paper suggesting that they not give Nixon um, a defense lawyer or something. I forget exactly. Um, but the problem is she would have been acting under her supervisor's orders to file it. So it's a whole thing about nothing.
So that's like a good example of how things can get twisted, right? And maybe and it could cause maybe good people with good intentions to maybe listen to something and say, okay, well, maybe this is what they said. This is probably what's true. And then when it comes down to the truth, maybe it's not so black and white, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like honestly, the Clintons are the perfect example of things are not black and white. Like like they are never as evil or as good as people make them out to be. But the fact of the matter is, to actually get a decent picture, you end up spending hours discussing minutia.
That's fair. Now, I do want to edge. We're getting towards the end here, so I just want to edge towards one
Okay.
last question. Yeah, we've been going for almost 20, 25 minutes. Pretty good. So I want to edge towards just the one last question. It has to do, of course, with Donald Trump and not any of his policies or whatever, but the liberal response to Donald Trump is what I want to talk about. What you think the proper response should be. I've seen a lot of people on the left double down on this SJW stuff. I saw a lot of people like I believe Joe Biden says we have to work more to get these the white voters in Michigan back. These working blue collar people. What do you think the solution is, and what should liberals do in a Trump presidency to maybe stay alive, remain vigilant, stay on edge?
Hammer away at every last failure he's inevitably going to set loose. It's as simple as that. I mean, the Republicans spent the first 2 years hammering away at Obama for things that weren't even conceivably his fault as he was dealing with the economic collapse. Here's the difference. Donald Trump is getting an economy at the best many people can currently remember. He was taking credit for the consumer confidence index registering at a 13-year high, despite the fact that it's been on an uptrend the entirety of Obama's presidency.
Just like any bounce back from a recession, but I'm sure his policies helped out in some ways. Maybe.
Yeah, it's the consumer confidence index. It's not an indicator of actual economic stability so much as how people are feeling. But but the fact that he's taking credit for it is going to be interesting because it's his ball to run with now. If we start to slip, if we go into, God forbid, another recession where we have shrinking economic growth, it's going to be his fault, and he's not going to have anyone to hide behind. There's no Democrats controlling the Senate. There's no Democrats controlling the House. They're about to get pushed off to the side a little bit with, well, I guess they're back to status quo with the Supreme Court, but you get my point.
Right. So regarding let's talk about a little bit about direction, and this will be the last thing. And you can make this quick, or you can make this long. Yeah, you can talk about this as much as you want. The directions
This one
liberals
might be
should
a long.
go.
This one might be a long one.
Directions liberals should go in general now. Hillary Clinton lost the election. It's been long enough that it's not like an upsetting thing to say.
Yeah, but I feel obligated to point out she won the popular vote.
Okay, everyone knows that.
Yeah, but I'm gonna keep bringing it up. In part because I want to say, because it annoys the Trump supporters and it annoys Trump himself. And the fact that it annoys them tells you it means at least a little something.
Fair enough, but back on point, direction liberals should go in general now after this election. Obviously, hammer down Trump and his mistakes, but what direction should they go philosophically? Should they go maybe more towards Sanders? Should they go more towards centrist? Wait, what direction? What's the best solution? It's okay. You don't have to have an answer. It's fine.
I think it's twofold. I think the one hand you need more of Sanders and his connecting to the voter. I think too many Democrats have the issue of hiding behind statistics. And I get the desire. You want to prove you're right because it's factually true. But the problem is, factually true doesn't necessarily translate to vote. Because the fact of the matter is, Barack Obama fundamentally brought the country forward. He did a lot of things most of the country generally finds popular.
Hope and change. Yeah, that's what he ran on.
But even in the specifics, people, and we're gonna see this play out. Obamacare, because of all the shit people have levied against it, when you say it, it gets a negative reaction from a certain segment of the population. But then you start explaining, okay, this is what Obamacare does. It has this policy, this policy, this policy, this policy. They go, oh, I like that, and that, and that, and that too. There have been several articles that are great articles, by the way. I forget where they all were when I read them. They all kind of blurred together.
Don't worry too much about it.
They were they were interviews with Trump supporters in like Kentucky, who were on Obamacare and who like Obamacare, and they voted for Trump anyway. But they told the reporter, and this was consistent just across every interview I saw, across a few articles, they didn't believe he'd actually repeal it.
Mm.
So now we're faced with, okay, they might repeal it. Who the hell knows? Well, I don't even think they know right now. And I've seen a lot of crazy discussions about it. But anyway, the point I want to make with that as an example is... What?
I think it's looking that way.
Maybe. That's going to be an issue. And I might outline why I have taken issue with it personally. But to finish up the thought, I think the thing Democrats need to learn moving forward is to take something from Bernie Sanders that I don't think they realize helped Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders unapologetically advocated for what he believed in.
And very consistent.
Barack Obama was so meandering about progressive policy. He never wanted to call it what it was. He never wanted to push a little bit more. He always wanted to try and come up with a compromise. He always wanted to be the adult in the room, the calming figure, to his own detriment.
So that's interesting. So what you're saying is basically that where Sanders did get it right is just in his rhetoric.
Absolutely, because Obama in 2008 and to a degree in 2012, when he ran, he suddenly got fired up. He touted what he did. He touted what he wanted to do. But whenever he got back into the office, it was always, well, the Republicans are holding this up
Right.
and they're being mean, but I believe in our better angels. And just like, come on, fight, man. You had a fucking super majority for the first 2 years of your presidency.
It's crazy.
Yeah, let that be a lesson. It's also one of the reasons I'm not like
Too concerned about the state of affairs currently.
no, I'm concerned about the state of affairs currently, but I'm not too concerned about the long-term effects, because
Right.
the end result and why I bring up the popular vote is the Republicans have only won the popular vote in this country 2 times in the last 30 years, in 1988 and 2004. Donald Trump got a lower percentage of the vote than Mitt Romney did 4 years ago. I believe it's still more votes, yes. But the reason I highlight this is, despite this nonsense about coastal elites that the right wing loves to spew, there are working class people across these states. I see them every day. I'm from Long Island. Like, it's not exact. Like, aside from the Hamptons, it's not exactly an elite paradise. Unlike the guy the right wing elected, we don't live in a golden tower above the rest of society.
I mean, it's like everywhere. Like even in red states, there's still 30% of people who vote Democrat, and even in blue states, very blue states, it's still maybe 30% of people that vote Republican. So there are people. These people are everywhere.
Absolutely, and hell, in New York, the Republicans, I think, are of a generally a more agreeable quality to my personal belief. 2 Republicans were the deciding votes on getting gay marriage for New York. Like,
a lot of it's the location.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned SJWs, and I know it's come up a little bit in the other two. And
all right, very quickly, just say your piece on SJWs, and then we'll end it there. Okay, so go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to kind of combine this with a little bit of a spiel about my personal beliefs, since we kind of went sidetrack away from what I believe about liberalism.
Okay.
The new right-wing buzzword is identity politics.
And cuck.
Sorry, you lagged. What was that?
And cuck, apparently.
Yeah, well, which it's not even a good insult. It just sounds annoying. Like, whatever, not important. With identity politics, the thing that drives me nuts about that phrase is, yeah, all politics is identity. Everyone's politics is their identity. In the last 2 interviews, Frank talked about his upbringing in conservatism. Charlie talked about his experience in Germany and bringing out his nativism and his issues with immigration. Everyone's identity shapes their experience. Their experience shapes their beliefs. Their beliefs are their politics.
Not to play devil's advocate here, I think the main point of contention is identity in a sense of individual versus applying yourself into groups. And and people on the right do it, people on the left do it, and I do see it. I see it. It's on both sides.
Yeah, but for some reason, aside from the very extreme versions on the right wing, like the alt-right stuff, it doesn't get as much flack for the right wing. Like this, like the term I hate, because I don't hate it. It's just, I find it really misrepresentative, is white working class. Like, why do white working class need a separate category from just working class?
In my opinion, they don't.
Exactly. But here's the thing. That's because white working class aren't their own segment of a culture. Well, that's even getting too. It's complicated.
It's so wishy-washy.
It's complicated, but what I'm saying is, I don't necessarily have a direct issue with people who identify with that stuff personally, because these groups form based around common experience. It's like Black culture in this country formed because they had to latch to each other. They had to build each other up. They didn't. Historically removed them from their homelands and their actual cultures. And
Have
within
things
America,
changed? Have things changed now?
I think it's still changing, because here's what I would always point to when people try to make the arguments that racism isn't still a huge issue for minority groups in this country. My mother and father were born within 3 years prior to Martin Luther King's assassination. I'm a generation removed from them. How far back do people think the height of modern racism really was? Like, we didn't end segregation all that long ago. And racism didn't go away overnight when we did that.
Fair enough, Danny.
I think
final point, and then we will end it because we've been going for a long time.
Yeah, no, I know. I feel like there's a lot to talk about since I'm the lone lefty.
We will do more of these, don't worry. I promise you that.
Oh, good. I appreciate it. Basically, I just think people don't empathize enough with their outgroup. That they don't realize the harm that other people have experienced levied against them, because they're so focused on the harm being done to them. That white working class, or whatever you want to call it, fears of their jobs, so they blame the Mexicans and the Chinese. And that Black and Hispanic people in the country have experienced such vile racism just through social media on a daily basis for some people, that they become distrustful. And there's a lot of great minority group thinkers who have written long and brilliantly on the topics that I would encourage everyone to go out and read more of. And I just think people need to understand that harm that people feel, that hurt exists, that you can't separate someone's pain from reality just because you want something to be done. Just
don't judge someone unless you walk a mile in their shoes, basically, right?
Kind of, but also just like
don't judge
things like the southern border wall that people think is going to solve their problems, but it won't. And then they choose to ignore the hurt that people feel when you advocate those kind of things, because they're just being emotional, they're being PC. That people who want a safe space about issues like rape don't do it because they're offended by the topic, but because some people genuinely cannot deal with their own personal trauma. And that they shouldn't be expected to try to explain that to every professor who might bring the topic up. That they shouldn't have to personally go out and convince some professor to give them a heads up about a topic like that. They should be able to get a warning without having to put themselves out there necessarily.
And that's fair to say. I personally disagree, but this isn't about me. This is about you.
Yeah.
So,
no.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just empathy.
Right. Empathy for people who experience things that maybe you don't know about, just general understanding.
Yeah, and learn a little history about culture and why we have the modern culture that we do. Like most people wouldn't ever stop to realize that like the Jersey Shore, like Italian culture, like that segment comes like the similarities to black culture there come largely from the fact that for a very long time in the early days of Italian immigration, they were seen as basically black.
You're damn right we were. I make that point a lot.
Yeah, but people have moved beyond it, and now they don't understand that history, and they don't understand why the culture looks that way now. And I think that's important to understand where we are now, to follow the roots.
That's fair. And I think that's a good spot to end it. I guess those were the final words. But
Yeah.
I want to thank you guys for watching. Getting to the end, so this end just ended up being a little longer than I wanted it to. But sometimes that's better to get the. It's okay. Sometimes it's better to get the point across. He is the only liberal on our podcast, so it's good to get his perspective on things. And I think we talked about a wide array of things, so that's good. If you like the video, please like, comment, and subscribe down below. For the few of you that did end up making it to the end, thanks. I'm gonna
share this video too. I want it to get more views than the other two.
Share this video too. Yeah, we're gonna try to do a video this Sunday, and if you like the interviews, we'll do more of them, or I'll just do more of them anyway because I want to.
That's good because I love to yammer.
That's fair. So until next time, guys. Peace.
Adios.